Here's something you may or may not have thought of. If you have a 2-liter motor that you converted to carbs, did you get a carb mount stand? The reason I say that is because the fuel injected, though this is not a Spica, it's the same principle. The fuel injected intake is bolted directly to the motor. Okay, there is no rubber isolators. Now we took a 2-liter. It's been around for a while, and what we did is it was already carbureted, but we took a lot of assumed values. Here's a brand new set of intake rubbers. Once we had this car up and running, and mind you, this motor's been sitting on the shelf for a very long time, but once we had this car up and running, what had happened is the rubber boots started to deteriorate very quickly. Though at the beginning, when we first tuning the car, the motor had a very smooth idle, no backfiring through the carbs or anything like that. It started to get progressively worse with an air scavenging issue. Then we finally concluded that we needed to find out what that was. So we took WD-40 on a hot motor. It's essentially the motor is hot because the rubber has to be allowed to expand into its operational state. So anyway, so we took some WD-40 on a hot motor, started spraying around the intake boots, and lo and behold, 3 of the 4 intake boots were ripped. You could tell because when you spray WD-40 around the intake boot, if that motor starts to hesitate or miss or have a reaction, then that means you are sucking in air through the intake boots. When I pull these off, you'll see what they look like. And this is something that may or may not happen. Basically, as the motor sits, it's more or less not at fault. But as the petroleum starts to transfer over the boot, it'll change its structure if the boots are starting to become perished. This is kind of what happens when you have a barn find car. You're going to have these little annoyances. You're going to have rubber, which initially has good visual inspection, starts to deteriorate very quickly because now that it has become active again, the heat cycling will create all sorts of wonderful issues. So we're going to change these boots out, put them back on the car, dial it in, and that'll be it. But the point is A, do you have a carb mount for your carburetors? Because keep in mind, the old boots were designed with the intent that you're going to have carb mount on there. When you don't have a carb mount out there, you have all that weight of those carburetors with the fuel that's inside of it sitting out there past the rubber, and it's pulling down on the rubber. It's going to eventually make this rubber very difficult to hold together without starting to tear. The other thing is that, quite honestly, the tighter the motor is from the intake side, the cleaner the air-fuel mixture action happens and the better the performance. So this isn't just for stabilization. This is also to maintain the consistent performance of your motor. Just food for thought. And now that I have the intake itself off of the boots, I'm starting to see some significant breakage in these boots. They're really, really past it. And this is a strange thing because we actually looked at all this before we put these carbs on. And though they were old, they were not leaking. Wow. And here's victim number 1. Now, this isn't staged, this is exactly what's happening. Again, we just repurposed these a month and a half ago, and they were in really good shape. I mean, we thoroughly tested them to make sure. But look what has happened just through a few heat cycles of running the motor. See that right there? This is literally separating from the vulcanization process. These are vulcanized onto the steel, which means that they should be absolutely bulletproof. And it is not. You can see that this is a heavy leak. That is on number 4. That's bad. This is one of the deals where I'm glad the actual owner of this car participated in this part. Because had he not done this part himself, you imagine having that explanation with rubber boots all of a sudden gave the ghost up. This is effectively exactly what happens when you're literally bringing a barn find, so to speak, back to life. Not everything is going to be in bad shape, so you just don't want to go randomly changing out everything. You have to kind of shake the car down. You have to allow things to fail. They're going to fail. I mean, there's certain things you don't risk. You don't risk the suspension parts. But something like this, if they look good, what are you going to do? That's Tank down below. He's making an awful lot of noise. Okay, so this is number 3. With number 3, these cracks that are inside here now, those cracks weren't there when we first put this together. The discoloration, and I realize this doesn't show up very well on camera, there's discoloration in there. This was solid black when we first put these on. This discoloration has come from us blowing WD-40 into this, around the area when this thing was running, and that's the WD-40 that seeped through to create the distortion in running. Number 2 also has very significant issues. Quite frankly, what started this wasn't what was happening on the other cylinders, what was happening on number 1. We were using our color tune, and we could not get number 1 to respond to the auto mixer screw, which suggested that it had an awful lot of air being pulled in somewhere. Okay, so now we got our new carb mounts on, and it's time to assemble. Now we're going to put our thread locker on. Not all thread lockers are the same. They're color coded. This is red, which is the highest strength, but there's variations of red. There's high temperature as well. Because this sits right next to the block, you have to assume it's going to be greater than 300 degrees on the immediate surface. So you should probably use the highest strength, highest heat resistance thread locker you can get. This particular stuff is rated for about 450 degrees, which is more than enough. Thread locker isn't cheap, but it is a must. Now what I like to do is I like to literally just have a few threads going and then fill the surface like a bowl with thread locker. It's going to soak down around the thread and coat the threading. So when I put the nut on there, it's going to carry some of that fluid down with it, and then it's going to really just give a nice encapsulation onto the stud. Okay, so we put the new intake boots on, put the carbs back into the car, and now it's time to fire it up and see where we're at. Settle in a little bit because it's been out of the car, fuel needs to catch up to flow holes and things like that. What you don't want to do is you don't want to start reacting and start twitching on your carburetor trying to tune them until the car is fully warmed up. Because what you need to be doing is you need to allow the rubber A to settle in, make sure it doesn't have any air leaks so you're trying to compensate for it by tuning the car. And the motor needs to be able to acclimate to what's called the steady state of operation. In other words, that's when the motor gets up to its operating heat, and then you should be able to dial it in from there. But it's the end of the day right now. We're not really looking to do a all that. All I'm really looking to do is just make sure that the fire's off and I don't have any massive whistling from air leaks. We'll do the rest of this tomorrow. That sounds pretty doggone good though. Putting sound deadening in. We're getting ready to put the carpet kit in this car. This car's a little bit of an interesting thing to us because we bought this car from a charity for a church. And we kind of had really no intentions of what we were going to do with it other than the fact that being a GTV, we couldn't let it go. So anyway, several years back, this car's been here a long time. Several years back, somebody brought in a camtail spire that was just way beyond reasonable dealings to fix. So we switched them over to this. We basically sold them the car for effectively what we paid for it, and with the intent that we're going to put it back together for them. Well, you know, sometimes it takes a long time to build these things because mostly you got to give people a break to, you know, because it's expensive. You got to give them a break so they can, you know, afford to do it. And when it comes out of the cycle, sometimes it's really hard to get the car back into the cycle. But now we're trying to chip away at it. We're trying to get things done as we go. And right now I'm putting in sound deadening for the carpet kit. So basically we're putting in sound deadening, then we'll heat the carpet to get it soft, and we'll start stretching it over the sound deadening and glue it into place. Yeah, that's where we're at. Okay, so we sprayed the glue onto the actual floor, and now we're going to put it on the actual sound deadening itself. Once those two items start to flash off and start to look like they're drying, is when you bond the two together. So I'm going to go spray the sound deadener. Putting the carpet kit in now. Not exactly my favorite thing to do. When you're trying to be budget conscious with customers, you tend to do these things in-house. It's always best served to do this with an upholstery guy, but again, it's a big hassle. You gotta have a lot of specialty tools, like special hole punches, you know, so you can get belt buckle mounts in. It's one of those things. This is one of the jobs I don't suggest you do. You kind of need a lot of specialty tools to really get the stuff to work right for you. You need to be able to heat it and stretch it and pull it into place. You need special hole punching tools. You know, you're not chopping up the carpet for the fitment of bolts and nuts that are going through it. It is a ponderous job. It is a hard job. Anyway, but it does make a complete difference on the car. And what we did is we got the rocker covers, the transmission, the backers which are under the seat, the sound deadening, and everything else is done. We're not going to put the main carpet, which is the floor section, in until tomorrow because they've been folded and sitting there for a while. And they need to relax and come clean with the creases. You know, when they're folded, they kind of have a memory, so to speak, to them that needs to be worked out. If I were to just glue those down, I'd be working against myself on that little folded area. So we're gonna let them relax overnight, and we'll lay this down tomorrow, along with firewall and more sound deadening. Like I said, this is this is not a job for the at-home guy. It really isn't.